Evil doesn't begin with blood. It begins with thought. It starts when empathy dies and justification takes its place. Every monster in history, every manipulator, every cold-hearted destroyer began as a human who chose to stop caring. This audiobook isn't about horror stories. It's about you. The seeds of darkness live inside every mind, including yours. The question is, will you control it or will it control you? Welcome to What Makes People Evil. Evil isn't a mystery. It's not magic. It's not a force that descends from the sky and infects people. Evil is a pattern of choices, stacked one on top of another until the person you used to be disappears. You call someone evil because it helps you distance yourself. It makes you feel safe. It makes you believe, I could never be like that. But that's the first lie. Evil doesn't start with the villain. It starts with justification. It starts with comfort. It starts with you saying, it's not that bad. It's not my fault. It's just how the world works. That's how it begins, not with a scream, but with a whisper. People don't wake up one morning and decide to destroy lives. They drift there. They explain their way there. They build a staircase out of excuses, and they climb it one step at a time. History is full of those staircases. A soldier saying, I was just following orders. A corporate executive saying, it's just business. A politician saying, it's for the greater good. Every one of those sentences is a small death of conscience. Every one of them pushes empathy a little further out of reach. You see, evil doesn't feel evil when you're doing it. It feels necessary. It feels deserved. It feels like you're surviving, not sinning. That's why people repeat it. That's why they justify it. And that's why it grows. Evil is not born. It's practiced. Say it again. Evil is not born, it's practiced. Every cruel decision is a rehearsal. Every small betrayal is a warm-up. Every time you ignore your conscience, you strengthen the muscle that lets you ignore it again tomorrow. You want to understand evil? Stop looking at monsters. Start looking at habits. The boss who screams at his employees because pressure makes results. The parent who shames a child for their own good. The friend who manipulates guilt to keep you close. These are the micro acts of practiced harm. That's what evil is. The ordinary, repeated harm that people normalize until it becomes their identity. The truth is simple. People become evil when they stop questioning their own motives, when they stop reflecting, when they stop caring. You can't fight what you refuse to understand, and if you don't understand it, you'll repeat it. That's the uncomfortable truth. When you label someone as evil, you make them inhuman, and when they're inhuman, you stop learning from them. You stop asking why. You stop seeing that same potential inside yourself.
But here's the hard truth. Everyone has the potential. You do. I do. We all do. The difference between who you are and who you could become is one decision repeated 1,000 times. One boundary ignored, one conscience silenced, one moment of, it doesn't matter. That's the key. Evil doesn't appear in the absence of good, it appears in the absence of awareness. It thrives when you stop paying attention, when you stop asking, why am I doing this? When you let the ends justify the means. That's when empathy dies. Evil is not an event, it's erosion. It's the slow wearing down of morality until all that's left is self-interest dressed as survival. You want to protect yourself from becoming evil? Then stop seeing it as a distant force. Start seeing it as a pattern you could fall into if you stop paying attention. The serial killer, the dictator, the manipulative partner, they're not aliens. They're human. Just humans who stopped questioning themselves long before you noticed. You have a choice. Every day, you have a choice. To justify or to reflect. To excuse or to confront. To repeat harm or to repair it. That's the difference. That's the only difference. You don't need their permission to choose awareness. You don't need approval to act with integrity. You just need the discipline to stop lying to yourself. Evil isn't a possession, it's permission. Permission you give yourself to ignore empathy. Permission to prioritize comfort over truth. Permission to do harm and call it logic. And the moment you stop giving that permission, you reclaim control. That's the transformation. You can't eliminate evil from the world, but you can stop feeding it in yourself. You can stop practicing it in small, invisible ways. The gossip you spread, the kindness you withhold, the resentment you justify. It's all connected, because evil doesn't need monsters. It needs ordinary people pretending not to notice. Stop pretending. Start noticing. Start paying attention to the small cracks in your own thinking. That's how awareness begins. And awareness kills evil faster than punishment ever could. When you call something evil, you make it someone else's problem. When you understand it, you make it your responsibility. Understand this. The people you fear weren't always fearless. They became that way through repetition, through desensitization, through constant practice of detachment. That's how cruelty becomes routine, not through madness, but through method. So the next time you see someone justify harm, don't just ask, how could they? Ask yourself, where have I justified my own? You want a clean conscience? Stop calling others evil while excusing your own smaller cruelties. Stop labeling and start learning. Stop condemning and start confronting. Evil doesn't fear judgment. It feeds on it. Because judgment divides, but understanding dissolves. Understanding brings it into the light. And once it's in the light, it loses its power. That's the first step of transformation. Stop calling it evil. Start understanding it. Because the more you understand the darkness, the less it controls you. The less you understand it, the easier it is to repeat it. So you have a choice: to wake up or to drift, to pay attention or to excuse yourself, to understand or to judge. You know what happens when you choose understanding? You reclaim your humanity. You stop pretending that morality is luck. You start owning it. And that's what this book is about. Ownership of your own mind, your own choices, your own potential for both light and dark. You mastered awareness in this chapter. You saw how evil begins, not in monsters, but in habits. Now let's take it deeper. You've seen what evil is. Next, we uncover how it grows.
Empathy.
the one thing that separates a human being from a machine. And yet, it's the first thing people kill. Quietly. Slowly. Without even realizing it. Empathy doesn't die in an instant. It fades. It fades the moment you stop listening. It fades the moment you stop caring. It fades the moment you start believing that someone else's pain is none of your business. That's how evil grows. Not in chaos. In comfort. The death of empathy doesn't look like violence. It looks like indifference. It looks like scrolling past suffering and saying, "That's sad," and doing nothing. It looks like stepping over a problem because someone else will handle it. That's the quiet beginning of every cruelty in history. When empathy dies, logic takes over. And logic, without feeling, is the most dangerous weapon in the world. Because logic can justify anything. Genocide. Abuse. Exploitation. All of it can sound rational when empathy is gone. You've seen it before. A soldier says, "It's for the mission." A boss says, "It's for the numbers." A politician says, "It's for the people." And yet, underneath all those words, someone is bleeding, someone is breaking, someone is being destroyed. That's what happens when people trade empathy for efficiency. They stop seeing faces and start seeing functions. They stop seeing humans and start seeing statistics. And when you turn people into data, it's easy to delete them. You have to understand something powerful. Empathy is not weakness. Empathy is discipline. It's the ability to feel without collapsing. To care without losing control. To stay human. In a system that rewards numbness. That's the key. The world will keep telling you to toughen up. To stop caring. To build thicker skin. But every time you obey that message, you lose a piece of yourself. You lose the part that connects you to truth. Evil doesn't shout. It whispers. It convinces. It smiles. Evil doesn't need hatred to exist. It only needs your numbness. Because numbness makes cruelty convenient. Look around. Watch how quickly people weaponize detachment. They'll say, "It's not personal, it's policy." It's not cruelty, it's culture. It's not abuse, it's ambition. That's the death of empathy in real time. People rebranding inhumanity as professionalism. You think the most dangerous people are the ones who enjoy hurting others? No. The most dangerous are the ones who stop feeling that they're hurting others. The ones who say, "I'm just doing my job." The ones who hide behind procedure while people suffer. That's how good people become functionaries in evil systems. That's how entire societies go blind because empathy isn't killed by monsters. It's killed by ordinary people protecting their comfort. You have a choice. You can stay aware, or you can get numb. You can keep feeling, or you can start justifying. When you lose empathy, you lose reality. Because empathy is what anchors you to truth. Without it, you become pure ego, seeing only what benefits you, hearing only what flatters you. That's why the loss of empathy is so seductive. It feels clean. It feels powerful. It feels like freedom. But it's not freedom. It's blindness. Think about the narcissist who manipulates everyone around them. They're not powerful. They're disconnected. They've lost the ability to see others as real. Everyone becomes a reflection, a tool, a mirror for their own insecurity. That's not strength. That's rot. And it always collapses. You want to protect yourself from that collapse? You need to practice empathy like it's a muscle. You need to test it, stretch it, and protect it from dying.
Stop assuming you understand. Listen longer than feels comfortable. Don't rush to respond. Don't rush to fix. Just hear. That's where empathy starts. Remember, people are fighting battles you don't see. When someone snaps, disappoints, or fails you, pause. Not to excuse, but to understand. Empathy doesn't mean tolerance. It means perspective. Feel deeply, but act decisively. Empathy is not pity. It's awareness turned into responsible action. You don't drown in other people's pain. You learn from it. That's the practice. And make no mistake, empathy is a practice. It takes work to keep it alive in a culture that keeps trying to kill it. The world will tell you, don't care too much. Ignore that. The world will tell you, it's not your problem. Ignore that too. Because that's how the world turns decent people into accomplices. You don't need permission to feel. You don't need approval to care. You don't need a reason to be kind. That's the discipline. Evil thrives where empathy dies. Every dictator, every abuser, every corrupt leader, they all share one trait: emotional numbness. They've convinced themselves that feelings are weakness. They've replaced compassion with control. And control feels good until it consumes you. You want power, then master empathy. Because empathy gives you clarity. Clarity about what's right, what's real, what matters. When you can feel without losing focus, you become unstoppable. Because now you see people as they are, not as you want them to be. You see motives, you see wounds, you see truth. That's the real strength. Not manipulation, not domination, awareness. Repeat it until it sinks in. Evil doesn't start with hate. It starts with the death of empathy. And empathy doesn't die because someone kills it. It dies because you stop feeding it. So feed it. Feed it daily. Feed it with understanding. Feed it with action. Feed it with humility. Because when empathy lives, cruelty starves. When empathy lives, power becomes responsibility instead of corruption.
When empathy lives, you stay human, no matter how dark the world gets. That's the practice. That's the point. That's the key. Now, before we move forward, remember this. Every time you choose to feel when it would be easier not to, you are choosing humanity over habit. Every time you choose understanding over judgment, you are refusing to become part of the problem. That's how you stay awake in a sleeping world. You've seen now how empathy dies, and how easy it is to let it die. But to understand the next level of darkness, you need to see what replaces empathy once it's gone. When people lose compassion, something else takes its place. Something intoxicating, something addictive. It's power. And power, without empathy, turns every human into a weapon. You've understood the death of empathy. Now it's time to see what fills the void it leaves behind.
They look just like everyone else. They smile like everyone else. They talk about family, about values, about hard work and decency. But behind the mask, there's calculation, there's control, there's the cold absence of empathy wrapped in the language of normal. That's the danger of evil. It doesn't always wear a dark cloak. Most of the time, it wears a suit. Evil hides in plain sight because it understands human psychology better than most people understand themselves. It knows what you want to see. It knows how to appear safe, trustworthy, even admirable. That's the mask of normalcy, and that's what you have to learn to see through. The most dangerous people are rarely the loud ones. They're the quiet ones, the composed ones, the ones who seem endlessly reasonable. They talk about fairness while planning to exploit you. They talk about loyalty while quietly collecting leverage against you. They talk about love while measuring what they can gain from you. You see, the mask of normalcy is not about deception. It's about survival. Evil survives by blending in. If it looked monstrous, it would be destroyed instantly. But if it looks charming, polite, professional, it can thrive. That's how entire systems of harm are built. That's how corruption passes as policy. That's how manipulation passes as leadership. And that's how cruelty becomes discipline. Evil doesn't declare itself. It adapts. It learns your language. It mirrors your tone. It studies your weaknesses and your ideals, and then it uses them against you. Let's take an example. In Nazi Germany, ordinary citizens became executioners because evil learned to speak their language: duty, pride, obedience. In corporate scandals, executives justify their crimes by invoking the language of success, growth, ambition, shareholder value. And even in personal relationships, emotional abusers hide behind the words, "I love you, I'm just trying to help, you're overreacting." Every time, the same principle applies. Evil knows it can't win with violence alone. It wins with trust. And here's the truth you need to face. You've probably trusted evil before. You've probably admired it. You've probably called it confidence or strength. Why? Because the mask works. Because humans are drawn to certainty, even when it's dangerous. Because when someone seems sure of themselves, you stop questioning their motives. That's how the mask of normalcy operates. It seduces your comfort. But here's what you have to understand. The mask only works if you refuse to look deeper. Ask yourself, who benefits when you stay silent? Who gains when you give your loyalty blindly? Who profits when you confuse charm with integrity? That's the key. Once you start asking those questions, the mask starts to crack. Because evil doesn't like scrutiny. It doesn't like being studied. It survives on ambiguity, on you not noticing the patterns. Look closely, and you'll start to see it everywhere. The colleague who takes credit for your work, smiling while they do it. The friend who manipulates guilt to keep control. The political leader who preaches unity but thrives on division. All of them wear the mask. All of them rely on your assumption that they seem normal. But normal is not a guarantee of goodness. Normal is just what most people do. And history has proven that most people can be complicit in horrific things. That's why you can't judge by appearances. You have to judge by patterns. Evil hides behind three main disguises: charm, competence, conformity. Charm tells you, I'm safe, you can trust me. Competence tells you, I know what I'm doing, follow me. Conformity tells you, everyone else is doing it, so it must be fine. Those three are the holy trinity of deception. They make cruelty look intelligent. They make manipulation look rational. They make exploitation look justified.
And the moment you stop questioning them, you're already part of the system. You have to train your perception. That's the discipline. Start listening not to what people say, but to what they avoid saying. Start noticing not their emotions, but their patterns of control. Start asking, who benefits from this narrative? That's how you decode the mask. That's how you stop being manipulated by surface appearances. You don't need to be paranoid. You just need to be awake. Because when you wake up, the mask loses its power. Think about this. Every serial manipulator, every corporate predator, every abuser in a position of trust depended on one thing above all else: the belief that they were just like everyone else. That's how they got promoted. That's how they got followers. That's how they got access. They weaponized your assumption that evil looks obvious. But evil rarely looks obvious. It looks ordinary until you know what to look for. And what are you supposed to look for? Inconsistency, when their actions don't match their words. Entitlement, when they believe rules are for others, not for them. Deflection, whenever they're confronted, they redirect the blame. Spot these three, and you've unmasked the actor. Because no mask can hide forever. The truth leaks through behavior. The truth is always in the pattern. You have to stop assuming goodness. You have to start demanding evidence. Because the world is not divided between good people and bad people. It's divided between those who justify harm and those who refuse to. And the ones who justify harm, they always look normal. They always sound reasonable. They always believe they're the hero of their own story. That's what makes them dangerous. Evil doesn't need to look monstrous to do monstrous things. It just needs to look human. Remember this, evil doesn't live in the shadows. It lives in systems, routines, habits. It thrives in what's normal. It grows in what's accepted. That's why the mask is so effective, because people want to believe the lie. But you can't afford that luxury anymore. You've seen too much. You've learned too much. You've recognized the patterns. Now you have to act differently.
You have to question what others don't. You have to listen for the silence behind the smile. Because once you can see the mask, you can't unsee it. You've learned how evil hides. Now it's time to learn how it spreads. You've seen the disguise. Now you need to understand the infection.
Evil doesn't need monsters. It just needs ordinary people who stop asking questions. That's how it spreads. That's how it survives. That's the contagion of influence, when one person's justification infects the mind of another, until cruelty becomes common sense. Evil doesn't recruit through fear, it recruits through belonging. It says, you're part of something bigger. It says, you're not responsible, you're just doing your job. It says, this is how the world works. And that's how it begins. Not with hatred, not with violence, but with agreement, with compliance, with silence. Every act of evil, no matter how vast, starts with one simple transaction: obedience. You don't have to believe in the cruelty, you just have to follow it. That's the dangerous part, because when people obey without thought, evil doesn't need to show its face anymore. It can just sit back and let the crowd carry out its will. That's what happened in every atrocity you've ever studied, from the concentration camps to corporate exploitation, from war crimes to digital manipulation. Ordinary people executed extraordinary harm, not because they wanted to, but because they stopped thinking. That's the infection. That's the contagion. It spreads when people trade responsibility for comfort. You see, influence is not about force. It's about persuasion. It's about finding what people already believe and twisting it just enough to serve a darker goal. Evil knows this. It knows that humans crave belonging more than truth. It knows that people want to be accepted, even if it means betraying their conscience. That's why every corrupt system starts with a moral justification. We're protecting our nation. We're serving our customers. We're following orders. We're just keeping the peace. Those are not lies. They're half-truths. And that's what makes them lethal. Because half-truths sound moral enough to silence your doubt. They sound noble enough to quiet your conscience. They sound safe enough to make you believe you're still a good person while you participate in something evil. Here's the rule. Evil thrives in the gap between intention and impact. Most people don't intend harm, but their silence, their obedience, their loyalty to convenience creates it. And once that process begins, the infection spreads fast. A boss pressures his employees to meet unrealistic goals. One cuts corners, another lies to meet a target, another hides a mistake. Soon, deception becomes standard. Soon, corruption becomes culture. No one planned it, but no one stopped it either. That's how systems of evil evolve, one rationalization at a time. No one takes responsibility because everyone's doing it. That's the contagion. It's psychological, it's social, it's invisible, but it's everywhere. Think about how social media operates. Manipulation isn't sold as control, it's sold as connection. Addiction isn't branded as harm, it's branded as engagement. Surveillance isn't described as intrusion, it's described as personalization. Every word is sanitized, every truth is softened, every evil is reframed until you can't see it anymore. And that's exactly how it keeps growing. You can't fight what you don't recognize. You can't resist what feels normal. That's why this chapter exists, to wake you up to the invisible contagion of influence that spreads not through violence, but through language. Because once you can hear the distortion, you can't be infected by it. Here's what you need to understand. Influence is not always bad. Leadership, inspiration, community, they're forms of influence too. But the line between leadership and manipulation is thinner than you think.
Leadership empowers. Manipulation controls.
Leadership gives choice. Manipulation takes it away. Leadership says, here's what's right. Manipulation says, here's what you should believe. And the difference is everything. Because evil doesn't ask you to think, it tells you what to think. It rewards obedience and punishes doubt. It makes you feel special for surrendering your judgment. That's the psychology of recruitment. In the 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram ran an experiment that changed how we understand obedience. He asked ordinary people to deliver electric shocks to strangers simply because a man in a lab coat told them to. Most participants kept going even when the victim screamed in pain. Why? Because authority told them it was necessary. Because they didn't want to challenge the system. Because they believed the responsibility wasn't theirs. That's the contagion in its purest form. The transfer of moral responsibility from the individual to the institution. And every time that transfer happens, evil wins. So how do you resist it? How do you become immune to the infection? You practice moral awareness. You keep ownership of your decisions, even the uncomfortable ones. You stop saying, I had no choice, because you always have a choice. You always have the option to pause, to question, to say no. That's the key. That's how the contagion breaks. Refuse to obey what feels wrong. Refuse to silence your conscience to fit in. Refuse to trade belonging for integrity. Because evil doesn't need your hatred, it only needs your participation. You have to be willing to stand apart. You have to accept that moral clarity often looks like rebellion in a corrupted world. You have to remember that every atrocity began with people who said, I was just doing what I was told. You are not here to obey. You are here to think. You are here to see. You are here to resist. Because once you stop thinking, you stop being human. And that's exactly what evil wants. To reduce you to a cog, to a function, to a yes man. But you are not a cog. You are a conscience. And conscience is the one thing evil cannot fully control. This is how you inoculate yourself against the infection. By staying alert. By staying uncomfortable. By staying responsible. The moment you hand over your moral compass, someone else will use it against you. The moment you stop asking why, you become part of someone else's agenda. You don't need permission to question authority. You don't need approval to say no. You don't need validation to stand alone. That's how you build immunity. That's how you stop the contagion from spreading through you. Remember, evil doesn't begin with violence. It begins with influence. It begins when good people stop thinking critically. It begins when ordinary individuals stop owning their choices. You have to be stronger than that. You have to be awake. You have to be responsible for what you obey. Because influence is power, and power without awareness always corrupts. You've seen how evil spreads. Now you need to see how it sustains itself. It doesn't just infect people, it rewires them. It reshapes their identity, their loyalty, their sense of purpose.
Listeners should be able to quote your key phrases after finishing. Power feels good. It feels safe. It feels like certainty in a chaotic world. That's why people chase it, protect it, and justify anything to keep it. And that's where evil finds its strongest foundation, in the illusion that control equals safety. People don't become cruel because they love destruction. They become cruel because they love control. Because control gives them the feeling they've escaped helplessness. That's the root of it all. Evil doesn't begin with hate, it begins with fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of being powerless. Fear of not mattering. When someone feels powerless, they have two choices. They can confront their fear, or they can dominate someone weaker. One path leads to growth. The other leads to corruption. Most people take the second path because it's easier to control others than to control yourself. It's easier to manipulate than to face your own insecurities. It's easier to rule than to understand. That's the seduction of power. It promises safety, but delivers addiction. Once you taste control, you want more. You want it over people, over systems, over narratives. You convince yourself you're keeping order, when really you're just feeding fear. Every tyrant, every abuser, every manipulator shares one core belief. If I'm not in control, I'm in danger. That's the lie. That's the seed of evil. Because when you equate control with safety, you justify anything to protect it. You justify lying. You justify coercion. You justify violence. You justify cruelty. And once justification begins, empathy ends. That's how power transforms ordinary people into predators. You can see it everywhere, from dictators to relationships. A partner who constantly checks your phone. A boss who micromanages every task. A government that uses fear to maintain order. Different scales, same psychology. Control disguised as care. Domination disguised as protection. They'll say, I'm doing this for your good. They'll say, I just want to keep things safe. But underneath, it's always the same impulse. Fear masquerading as leadership. Because if they can control you, they don't have to face themselves. That's the key lesson. Power without self-awareness becomes poison. When someone in control stops questioning their motives, they stop being human. They start seeing people as tools, extensions of their will. And that's when cruelty becomes strategy. But here's the paradox. Power is never truly secure. The more you grasp it, the more fragile it becomes. The more you dominate others, the more enemies you create. The more you manipulate, the less trust you have.
Listeners should be able to quote your key phrases after finishing. That's the trap. That's why tyrants live in paranoia. They control everything, yet trust no one. They win every battle, yet sleep in fear. Because control isn't safety, it's imprisonment for both the controller and the controlled. Power doesn't corrupt instantly. It corrodes slowly. It whispers instead of shouting. It starts with a small lie. I deserve this. Then another. I'm just making things efficient. Then another. They can't handle it without me. Each lie feels harmless, even noble. Each one chips away at conscience. Each one feeds the illusion that you're the hero, even as you become the villain. That's how evil sustains itself, through self-deception. You convince yourself you're in control, when in truth, control has consumed you. The great irony of power is this. The more you try to control others, the less control you have over yourself. Because control feeds fear. Fear feeds control. It becomes a cycle, one that can destroy nations, families, and minds. Real power isn't about control. It's about restraint. It's about discipline. It's about the ability to not act on every impulse to dominate. That's strength. That's mastery. That's leadership. History is filled with people who lost themselves to control. Dictators who believed they were saviors. Religious leaders who believed they were divine.
corporate executives who believed they were untouchable. They all started with good intentions. They all told themselves the same story. I'm doing what's necessary. But necessity is the first mask of evil. It excuses anything. It rationalizes everything. When you hear someone say, "I had to do it," pay attention. That's usually the moment they chose control over conscience. So how do you resist the seduction of power? By remembering one truth. Control is temporary. Character is permanent. Control fades the moment you lose authority. Character endures even when you lose everything else. You don't need to dominate people to feel safe. You need to discipline yourself to stay free. When you master yourself, you no longer need to manipulate others. When you trust yourself, you no longer need to control outcomes. When you understand yourself, fear loses its grip. That's real power, internal, not external. It can't be stolen, it can't be bribed, it can't be corrupted. Here's what you need to repeat until it sinks in. You don't need control, you need clarity. You don't need domination, you need discipline. You don't need to be feared, you need to be respected. And that starts with respecting yourself. When you chase control, you lose peace. When you chase peace, control becomes unnecessary. That's the transformation. That's how you stop feeding evil. Because evil grows where fear rules, and fear rules wherever control is mistaken for safety. So the next time you feel the urge to dominate, to prove, to force, stop. Ask yourself, am I leading or am I controlling? Am I protecting or am I projecting? Am I empowering others or am I just feeding my fear? That's the mirror you need to hold up every day. That's how you stay clean in a world obsessed with power. Because the most dangerous lie you can believe is this: I'm in control, so I'm safe. You're not. You're enslaved to your own illusion. Freedom isn't having control. Freedom is not needing it. You've learned how power seduces. Now it's time to understand how it isolates. Because the more power you take, the more disconnected you become from truth, from empathy, from reality itself. And that's where the descent deepens.
Power isolates. Always. It starts subtly, a small distance between you and them. At first you call it focus, then you call it leadership. But one day you wake up and realize you're surrounded by people who obey you and none who truly know you. That's the isolation trap. It's the price of unchecked control. And it's the stage where power stops protecting you and starts consuming you. Because when you stop being questioned, you stop being real. When no one can challenge you, you stop growing. When everyone fears you, you start fearing everyone. That's the dark irony. The pursuit of control, the thing you thought would keep you safe, becomes the very thing that destroys your connection to humanity. Evil doesn't just corrupt your morality. It disconnects you from empathy. It separates you from feedback, truth, and humility until you're trapped inside your own echo chamber. You start believing your own stories. You start confusing obedience with respect. You start mistaking silence for loyalty. That's when the descent becomes irreversible. Because once you lose connection to people, you lose reflection. And without reflection, conscience dies quietly. Not in one blow, but through years of isolation. Look through history. Every dictator, every tyrant, every corrupt leader, they all ended the same way, surrounded but alone. They had servants, not friends. They had applause, not honesty. They had everything except peace. That's the pattern. Power isolates because it builds walls instead of bridges. It replaces trust with fear. And fear cannot coexist with truth. When everyone around you says yes, your downfall has already begun. Evil understands this perfectly. That's why it rewards loyalty over integrity.
It removes critics. It silences dissent. It convinces you that isolation equals strength, that being untouchable makes you invincible. But isolation doesn't make you untouchable, it makes you blind. When you isolate yourself from empathy, you stop seeing people as human beings. They become numbers, roles, obstacles. You dehumanize them, and eventually you dehumanize yourself. That's how atrocities become possible. Not through rage, but through distance. It's easy to harm what you don't feel connected to. It's easy to destroy what feels foreign, inferior, or different. That's why power always dehumanizes, because empathy threatens its illusion of control. Evil needs separation to survive. It needs emotional distance to justify cruelty. It needs you to stop feeling so you can keep functioning. That's the isolation trap. You think you're becoming efficient, decisive, powerful, but in truth you're becoming mechanical, stripped of warmth, stripped of compassion. The isolation trap doesn't just happen to leaders. It happens in relationships, workplaces, even families. A parent becomes the authority, not the guide. A boss becomes the commander, not the mentor. A spouse becomes the controller, not the partner. Slowly, love is replaced by hierarchy. Communication is replaced by commands. Mutual respect is replaced by silent compliance. And when that happens, connection dies. Because real connection requires vulnerability. And vulnerability is the one thing power fears most. Here's the truth. Evil doesn't fear weakness. Evil fears connection. Because connection destroys manipulation. When people truly see each other, manipulation collapses. When people truly feel each other's pain, cruelty loses its justification. When empathy enters, control loses its grip.
That's why the isolated person, the one who feels above others, is always in danger. Because they've cut the last thread tying them to accountability. The isolation trap creates a loop of paranoia. You stop trusting others because deep down you know you've betrayed their trust. You start seeing everyone as a threat because deep down you know you've become one. And so you isolate further. More guards, more distance, more control. Until you're alone in a world built on fear, a king in an empty kingdom. That's not strength. That's decay. If you want to stay human in a position of power, you must protect your connection. Surround yourself with people who tell you the truth, not what you want to hear. Welcome criticism. Invite disagreement. Because disagreement is not disrespect. It's a mirror. And mirrors are how you stay human. That's the discipline. That's the protection. That's the antidote to isolation. You must also learn to reconnect with your own emotions. When power numbs you, empathy must reawaken you. Ask yourself, when was the last time I truly listened, not commanded? When was the last time I asked, "How are you?" and waited for the answer? When was the last time I admitted I was wrong? Those are not weaknesses. Those are anchors, reminders that you are not a god, you are human. And humanity is what evil fears most. Because humanity sees, humanity feels, humanity remembers. Isolation tells you you don't need anyone. But the truth is, everyone needs someone who can speak the truth to their face. The moment you start believing you're above that, you've already stepped into the abyss. That's why you must resist isolation with deliberate connection. You must build systems that challenge your ego. You must create spaces where honesty is safe, even when it hurts. Because without that, your power becomes delusion, and delusion is the final stage before destruction. Remember this. Isolation is not protection. It's corrosion. It doesn't keep you safe. It keeps you disconnected. It doesn't make you strong. It makes you hollow. And when you're hollow,
Anything, even evil, can fill you. You have to stay grounded. You have to stay surrounded by truth. You have to stay connected to humanity. Because once you lose that connection, you stop leading and start controlling. You stop guiding and start consuming. You stop living and start existing as the shell of what you once were. That's the cost of power without empathy. That's the isolation trap. But if you're aware of it, you can escape it. You can rebuild connection. You can restore humility. You can choose humanity over hierarchy. You have a choice. And that choice, not control, is your real strength. You've seen how power isolates. Now you must understand what keeps the isolated alive, the illusion of righteousness. Because even in solitude, the corrupted mind tells itself it's right, it's moral, it's chosen. That's the next layer of deception. That's how evil stays justified.
People don't become monsters by calling themselves monsters. They become monsters while insisting they're good people. That's the deception. That's the mask. Every act of evil needs a disguise, and the most effective disguise is virtue. People hide their cruelty behind good intentions. They weaponize morality to justify destruction, and they convince themselves that they're right, even when they're clearly wrong. That's the mask of morality, and you've seen it everywhere. The politician who lies for the greater good, the soldier who kills for peace, the parent who emotionally destroys their child out of love, the executive who exploits workers for the company's success. Every one of them tells themselves the same story. I'm the good one here. But that's the problem. When you believe you're inherently good, you stop questioning yourself. And the moment you stop questioning yourself, you become dangerous. Here's the truth. Evil doesn't always wear black. It often wears white, pure, righteous white. It smiles, prays, and says all the right things. It sits in church pews and boardrooms. It hugs you while it's stabbing your back. That's why the most terrifying people in history weren't the ones who thought they were evil. They were the ones who thought they were good. Let's talk psychology. Moral licensing. That's the term. It means once people do something they consider good, they give themselves permission to do something bad. I worked hard all week. I deserve this. I'm not racist. I have friends of every background, so this joke is fine. I'm a good person, so this little lie doesn't count. You see it everywhere. The brain protects the ego first, not the truth. We create a moral scoreboard in our heads, like, I've earned enough good points to get away with this one bad act. That's how the decline begins. That's how evil gets permission. Because every atrocity starts with self-excuse. I'm not the bad guy. They had it coming. I'm doing this for them. Every justification is a brick in the wall between your conscience and your actions. And once the wall is built, empathy dies. Let's go deeper. There is another level, collective morality, the good group syndrome. The moment people believe their group is morally superior, they stop seeing outsiders as human. They say things like, we're the chosen ones. They're corrupted. We have to cleanse. That's the exact language of every genocide, every cult, and every moral crusade that ended in destruction. It's always us versus them, the righteous versus the wicked. And when you're convinced you're righteous, anything becomes permissible. That's how societies justify evil. Not through monsters, through heroes. Not through hatred, through duty. Remember this. Evil doesn't start with hate. It starts with certainty. The unshakable belief that you're right, that your morality is pure, that your cause is divine.
That's the most seductive lie in the world. Now look at yourself. Where are you hiding behind your own version of, I'm a good person? Be honest. Where have you used morality as a shield for selfishness? Have you ever judged someone for doing what you secretly wanted to do? Have you ever condemned someone's failure while hiding your own?
That's the subtlety of it. We all wear the mask sometimes. We all polish our image while ignoring our darkness. And if you never confront that, it grows. So here's the call. Stop defending your image. Start interrogating your motives. You don't need to prove that you're good. You need to make sure you're not hiding your evil behind your goodness. Because goodness isn't a costume. It's a discipline. It's the daily act of self-awareness. It's the courage to say, I was wrong. It's the willingness to admit that your moral code might be flawed. That's how you stay human. Repeat this until it sinks in. Evil doesn't need hatred. It only needs moral self-deception. It only needs the comfort of saying, I'm right. That's the virus. That's the blindness. And it's everywhere, in governments, in corporations, in families, in relationships. Anywhere morality becomes performance instead of practice. So if you want to resist evil, start here. Don't be so sure you're one of the good ones, because the moment you become sure of that, you're already halfway gone. This is the paradox of morality. The more certain you are that you're good, the easier it becomes to justify harm. The more you proclaim your purity, the more you hide your corruption. The louder you declare your virtue, the less you hear your conscience whispering in the dark. So stop shouting about goodness. Start practicing awareness. Start asking the question most people are too afraid to ask. What if I'm the problem? That's the courage most never reach. That's the threshold where transformation begins. Evil hides behind the illusion of goodness. But when you remove the mask, you see it clearly, not as some distant monster, but as a reflection. And once you see that reflection, you have a choice. You can keep lying to yourself, or you can face the truth and change. Because in the end, the difference between a good person and an evil one isn't what they believe, it's what they're willing to admit. You just tore off the mask. Now it's time to look at what's underneath it, the hunger for control that hides behind every moral justification. You've seen how the good become blinded. Now, let's see how power completes that blindness.
Power is a drug, and like any drug, once you taste it, you want more. Not because you need it to survive, but because it changes how you see yourself. It convinces you that you're untouchable. It convinces you that you deserve to decide for everyone else. That's how ordinary people become dictators. That's how leaders become tyrants. That's how the seed of evil blooms, not in chaos, but in control. Understand this clearly. Evil doesn't begin with hate. It begins with control, the need to dominate, the craving to be obeyed, the obsession to shape reality until it fits your comfort. And the scary part? It starts small. It starts with interrupting others because you think your opinion matters more. It starts with manipulating people for their own good. It starts with controlling how someone dresses, speaks, or feels because you care. Every little act of control grows. And before you know it, control becomes your oxygen. That's the addiction. And once it hooks you, you'll do anything to keep it. Power doesn't corrupt instantly. It corrupts gradually. At first it feels good, like you're finally seen, finally respected. People listen when you talk. They wait for your approval. You think this is what leadership feels like. But then something shifts. You stop leading. You start owning. You start believing that your way is the only way. And the moment that happens, you've crossed the line. Power stops serving others. It starts feeding your ego. That's when the addiction takes over. Here's the truth most people don't want to face. Power doesn't just reveal character, it amplifies weakness. It exposes the ego you were too afraid to admit existed. It magnifies your insecurities until you try to bury them under authority. And when that happens, you start controlling people not to lead them, but to silence your own fear. That's why the cruelest leaders are always the most insecure. That's why the most abusive people often have the most fragile self-esteem, because control isn't confidence. It's fear disguised as dominance. It's the desperate attempt to stop the world from reminding you that you're small. But here's the twist. The more you control, the smaller you actually become. You trade freedom for surveillance. You trade trust for fear. You trade humanity for order. And every step deeper into that trade pulls you closer to evil. Let's call this what it is: the illusion of control. You never really control people. You only control their fear of consequences. And fear is temporary. The moment fear fades, rebellion begins. That's why every dictator eventually falls. That's why every manipulator eventually gets exposed. Because fear is not loyalty. And power built on fear always collapses. So when you see people obsessed with control, they're not strong. They're terrified. Terrified of losing relevance, terrified of being forgotten, terrified of not mattering without power. That's the real face of control. Not dominance, but desperation. Now think about your own life. Where are you addicted to control? Maybe it's your relationships. You can't let people be who they are because you need to feel safe. Maybe it's your job. You micromanage because you don't trust others to get it right. Maybe it's your emotions. You suppress them because they make you feel weak. Here's the truth. Control is the opposite of strength. Real strength is letting go. Real strength is leading without forcing. Real strength is influencing without manipulating.
You don't need control to have power. You need clarity. You need conviction. You need self-mastery. Because the only power that can't corrupt you is power over yourself. Remember this phrase. Repeat it until it burns into your mind. Power without purpose becomes poison. When power stops serving something higher than your ego, it starts consuming you. That's why tyrants always end alone. That's why narcissists always implode. Because they built their power on domination, not discipline. You can't build stability from fear. You can't build greatness from control. Every empire built on manipulation eventually turns on itself. That's not opinion. That's history. Let's break the illusion even more. Control feels like safety, but it's actually suffocation. You lock people down, they stop thinking. You silence dissent, creativity dies. You remove risk, growth disappears. Control kills everything it touches. Love, art, freedom, innovation. That's why evil systems collapse. They choke their own oxygen supply. The paradox is brutal. The more you tighten your grip, the more slips through your fingers. You can dominate people for a while, but you can't dominate truth forever. Because truth doesn't obey authority. It exposes it. That's why every person addicted to control eventually faces the same nightmare. They lose control. They lose the fear that kept others silent. And when that happens, the empire falls. Every time. You have a choice. You can keep trying to control everything, your image, your relationships, your outcomes, and become a prisoner of your own system. Or you can learn the art of surrender, the strength of discipline, the power of influence without force. That's the way out of the addiction. That's the cure. Because real power doesn't demand submission. It inspires respect. Real power doesn't control. It liberates. And once you understand that, you become untouchable. So here's your challenge. Audit your life. Find where control has replaced trust. Find where fear has replaced leadership. And break the pattern. Let people breathe. Let life move.
You'll be shocked how much power returns to you when you stop trying to control everything around you. Power always demands more, but only from the weak. The strong know when to stop. The wise know what to surrender. And the good? They never forget that power was meant to serve, not enslave. You've learned the cost of control. Now let's expose its partner, desensitization. Because once control takes hold, the next step in the path of evil is emotional numbness, the death of empathy.
Evil doesn't begin with violence. It begins with numbness. With the quiet moment when you stop feeling what you should feel. When someone suffers and you don't flinch. When someone cries and you don't care. When cruelty feels like nothing more than routine. That's when the transformation completes. That's when humanity shuts off. And what replaces it isn't rage or hate. It's emptiness. Cold, quiet, mechanical emptiness. This is the truth nobody wants to hear. Most evil isn't committed by monsters. It's committed by people who stopped feeling. They stopped caring not because they were born without empathy, but because they trained themselves to ignore it. They told themselves, I have to do my job. I don't have time for emotion. It's just how things work. You've heard that before. You've probably said it yourself. That's how evil spreads, not through passion, but through apathy. Let's call it what it is: emotional desensitization. Every time you witness pain and scroll past it, you desensitize. Every time you laugh at someone's humiliation, you desensitize. Every time you silence your guilt instead of facing it, you desensitize. And the more you do that, the less you feel. The less you feel, the less human you become. Until one day you wake up and nothing touches you anymore. That's not strength. That's decay. That's death disguised as composure. Look around you. You're living in an era of numbness. We scroll through suffering like it's background noise. We film pain instead of helping. We measure tragedy in views, likes, and engagement. And we call that normal. We've turned empathy into entertainment. We've monetized trauma. We've learned to laugh at collapse, not prevent it. That's how societies rot, not from chaos, but from indifference. Here's the psychological reality. Your brain adopts to what you repeatedly expose it to. If you surround yourself with cruelty, your empathy shuts down to protect you. It's a survival mechanism, a shield against overload. But that shield becomes a cage, because once you stop feeling pain, you also stop feeling love. You can't selectively numb emotion. When you turn off one side of the heart, you dim the whole thing. That's the trap of numbness. It doesn't just protect you from suffering, it isolates you from life. Let's make it personal. Think about a time you saw injustice, maybe at work, maybe in your family, and stayed silent. You told yourself, it's not my problem. You justified it with logic. I can't change it anyway. But deep down you felt something. That brief discomfort, that flicker of empathy, that was your humanity. And every time you silence that voice, it grows weaker, until one day, it's gone.
That's what happens to entire systems, too. Governments, corporations, armies. They lose empathy institutionally. They turn morality into metrics. They call it procedure. They say, we're just following orders. And behind that phrase, a million small evils unfold. This is why evil thrives in bureaucracies, because bureaucracy kills emotion. When you're just a cog in the system, you stop feeling responsible. You stop feeling anything.
And that's exactly how people sleep at night after doing inhuman things. Remember this phrase: when you stop feeling, you stop seeing. Because empathy isn't weakness, it's awareness. It's the ability to see beyond your own comfort, to see the humanity in someone else. And when that vision dies, morality dies with it. Now listen carefully. You can't fight evil with outrage alone. You fight it by feeling again. You fight it by staying sensitive in a desensitized world, by refusing to normalize cruelty, by choosing compassion even when it hurts. That's not easy, but it's necessary, because empathy is the only force that can break the cycle. It's what reminds you that your actions matter, that other people's pain is real, that suffering isn't background noise, it's a call to act. So here's your discipline. Train your empathy like a muscle. Notice the moments you feel nothing and question them. When you see suffering, don't scroll away. When you see injustice, don't explain it away. When you make a cruel joke, pause. Ask yourself, why am I comfortable with this? That's how you rebuild your sensitivity. That's how you reverse the numbness. And yes, it will hurt. It's supposed to, because pain is proof that you can still feel. And if you can still feel, you can still change. You have a choice. You can keep living half dead, numb, efficient, detached. Or you can come back to life, vulnerable, compassionate, awake. You can stop being another cog in the machine and start being human again. That's not weakness. That's rebellion. That's resistance. Because the world doesn't need more cold efficiency. It needs more people who still care. And if you can be that person, even in a world that's forgotten how, you're already fighting evil in its purest form. This is where the war turns inward. You've seen how numbness kills empathy. Now it's time to see what replaces it: the void. The final stage where nothing matters, where destruction becomes meaning itself.
There is a final stage of evil. It's not rage, it's not hate, it's nothing. It's the total collapse of meaning, the moment when nothing matters anymore. When nothing matters, there are no rules. There's no empathy, no guilt, no purpose. There's only the hunger for stimulation, the need to feel something, anything, even destruction. That's the void within. And once someone falls into it, they'll burn the world just to see a spark. This is what philosophers like Dostoevsky warned about. When God is dead, everything is permitted. He wasn't talking about religion alone. He was talking about the death of meaning. When you lose your connection to purpose, you lose your boundaries. When you stop believing in right and wrong, all that's left is pleasure and power. That's when evil stops pretending to be moral. That's when it stops hiding behind justifications. That's when it embraces chaos openly. It doesn't need a cause anymore. Destruction becomes the cause. You can see it in the world today. People destroying lives for views, leaders lying for sport, communities tearing each other apart over nothing. Because when meaning dies, the only thrill left is chaos, and chaos gives a false sense of life. The void doesn't whisper, it seduces. It tells you nothing matters, so do what you want. It disguises itself as freedom, but it's enslavement. Because if nothing matters, then you don't matter either. And once you believe that, you'll do anything to distract yourself from the emptiness. Let's call this what it is: nihilistic collapse. It's not a philosophy, it's a psychological implosion. The person stops seeking truth and starts chasing intensity. They replace purpose with dopamine. They replace love with dominance. They replace connection with consumption. And every hit of chaos numbs them more. Every act of destruction feeds the illusion of power. But behind the mask, there's nothing left. Just exhaustion, just emptiness, just the echo of meaning that used to exist. That's the void, and it's spreading faster than ever. Think about it. We live in an age of overstimulation, constant news, constant outrage, constant noise. We've made attention our currency, and in that race, depth has died. We scroll, we consume, we perform, but we rarely believe. And that's dangerous, because when belief dies, conscience dies with it. That's why so many people feel lost. They don't know what's right or wrong anymore. They don't know what to fight for. So they fight for nothing or everything, just to feel alive. That's the psychology of the void. Desperation disguised as rebellion. Pain disguised as freedom.
Here's the truth you must understand. When nothing matters, everything hurts. Because your soul wasn't designed for emptiness. It was designed for meaning, for purpose, for creation. And when you rip that out, nature fills the vacuum with something darker. Despair, addiction, violence, obsession. That's not coincidence. It's physics of the spirit. Energy has to go somewhere. And when purpose dies, energy turns inward, devouring the person from the inside out. But here's the paradox. The same void that destroys can also awaken. Because when you hit absolute emptiness, when the noise finally fades, you face a terrifying question. If nothing matters, then what could? That's where transformation begins. That's where you can rebuild. Not with borrowed beliefs, not with social validation, but with raw truth. You start small, one act of meaning, one moment of honesty, one choice that isn't about reward or attention, but about principle. That's how you begin to crawl out of the void. You don't fight the void by running from it. You fight it by defining yourself inside it, by saying, even if nothing matters to the world, it matters to me. That's power. That's creation. That's rebirth. Because evil thrives in emptiness, but it dies in purpose. The moment you decide what matters, you reclaim your soul. You stop being a passenger of chaos. You become a creator of meaning. And that's what this entire journey has been about. You started by learning that evil isn't born, it's practiced. You saw how justification, control, and numbness build the architecture of destruction. And now you see the final truth. Evil survives only when people stop caring, stop questioning, stop believing. So here's your challenge, your ultimate act of rebellion in a meaningless world. Care anyway. Believe anyway. Act with integrity anyway. Because that's how you win. Not by destroying evil, but by refusing to become it. You've seen the pattern. You've heard the lies. You've looked into the void. Now it's time to choose. Will you let it consume you? Or will you be the one who creates meaning where none existed before?
That's the question every generation must answer. That's the choice that defines humanity itself. And when you choose, when you decide that something does matter, you break the chain. You silence the void. You end the cycle. Because in a world where nothing matters, the most powerful act of all is to care anyway.
Listen carefully, because everything you've heard, everything you've faced in this journey, it all leads here. You've seen the anatomy of evil. You've seen how it begins, not with monsters, but with choices. You've seen how it grows through justification, control, and numbness. And you've seen where it ends, in the void, where nothing matters and everything is permitted. That's the destination of every unchecked ego. That's the graveyard of humanity. And it's closer than you think. But there's a way out. There's always been a way out. It's not complicated. It's not mystical. It's one decision, one act of rebellion against apathy. Care anyway. Care when the world tells you not to. Care when people call it weakness. Care when you gain nothing from it. Care when it hurts. Because the moment you stop caring, you stop being human. And that's how evil wins. Not through force, but through indifference. You have a choice. Every day, in every interaction, you decide whether you feed the light or the dark, whether you justify cruelty or confront it, whether you follow the pattern or break it. Don't wait for the world to change. Change how you see it. Change how you respond to it. You don't need permission. You don't need approval. You only need the courage to care in a world that's forgotten how. That's the key. That's the cure. That's the message. Because in the end, evil isn't destroyed by power. It's destroyed by conscience, by people like you, awake, aware, and unwilling to go numb. So remember this every single time you're tempted to turn away. When nothing matters, care anyway. That's how you stay human. That's how you fight evil. That's how you win.